Good afternoon, all. We are beginning with a very important session, how to eliminate HTLV1 as a public health problem. First, I want to thank the organizers, Dr. Fabiola Martin, because all that he has pushed up for this be a reality in this Congress, Dr. Haraham, and all. You know that you can scan in this code to log into Slido to push the question to us, and we can read in the phone. So, or you can come here and ask directly. So.
Thanks. And just a reminder, please, if everyone can put their phones on silent. And yeah, without further ado, then we'll call for the first presenter, please, who's Renato Olivia Gadelha Romero, who's speaking on interstate technical cooperation to advance the public health response to HTLV in Brazil, a case report of a successful initiative. And Renato is from the State Public Health Department of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil.
So, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here to present our work about HTLV in Brazil. So, this is a map of the 5 regions of Brazil, and I will speak about 3 states in northeast of Brazil. First of one is Rio Grande do Norte, second, Paraíba, third, Bahia. It will all start back in 2021 when the health professionals, 5 nurses working in surveillance, epidemiological surveillance, decided to form a technical group to discuss and to implementation of the line of care to prevent HTLV vertical transmission. And our technical group has the support, the scientific support from founders of HTLV channel and research from Fiocruz, Bahia, and Pernambuco. Pernambuco is another state in northeast of Brazil. So, in 2022, we conduct a technical visit to health services in Bahia state. So we had the opportunity to visit the laboratory, the epidemiological surveillance, the healthcare assistance services, and civil society organization, HTLV. So on top of that, we gave lectures on prevention of HTLV vertical transmission. So in this photo is Joana, she's a nurse. She is a manager of STI in Paraíba State, and she gave an interview about HTLV in her state. So in this photo, it's me to give lectures about HTLV, prevention, health care, on symposium on syphilis. So the technical group understood that it's very important to talk about HTLV prevention, take care in another scenarios, in another conference, in another symposium on STI. Because the managers and the professionals health work didn't know about the HTLV, but they understand about STI. So in 2022, there was an event to share our challenges, our perspectives in the Bahia and Rio Grande do Norte states at the 15th International Symposium of HTLV in Brazil. So on top of that, we did a first meeting about HTLV line with the Ministry of Health of Brazil. So in this meeting, we're talking about our future prospects, our challenges, our advances. So in 2023, it was a milestone for us. because it was the first time that states organized the 50th International Symposium of HTLV in Brazil. So it's a huge challenge for us. On top of that, we did the second meeting about HTLV line with the Minister of Health of Brazil. And again, we discussed about our future prospects, challenges, and advances about our implementation of HTLV line care. So in the current year, we share the advances and challenges in the 3 states, Paraíba, Bahia, and Rio Grande do Norte, on a virtual meeting on a National Day to Fight to HTLV in Brazil. It is March 23. So, about our advances. In these 3 states, we have dispensed infant formula for all children exposed to HTLV and cabergoline for all pregnant women to live with HTLV. We have intersectoral coordination with laboratory, assistance services, and epidemiological surveillance. In Bahia and Paraíba states, they have HTLV compulsory notification and prenatal test of a pregnant woman. And only Bahia state has the technical note about monitoring of children exposed to HTLV. So, about our future prospect, in conclusion. Rio Grande do Norte state intended to catch up with the other policies developed by the states of Bahia and Paraíba. Paraíba states intend to extend the test for all pregnant women, because nowadays the test is offered only to high-risk pregnancy. And Bahia state to expand monitoring of HTLV care line to other health regions into the states. So that's it. Thanks so much to share our experience with you.
Well, next speaker, all know him very well, Dr. Eduardo Gotuso from Tropical Medicine Institute of Cayetano Heredia Peruvian University in Lima. We will speak about exploring breastfeeding knowledge and attitude in a sample of Peruvian women living with HTLV1.
Thank you, Mirna. Thank you to organize, to invite, to present this oral paper we have, because, you know, everybody is doing a lot of work to try to reduce the transmission. And for us, it's very important. This was a group who worked with these women who are coming to see us. We have one outpatient office in the hospital when we see patients every day, and we have one of the largest cohorts in the world, because we have almost 5,000 positive from 11,000 people who was studied. And for us, this topic is becoming important from different reasons. First, I have not any conflict from interest. But let me make a summary about this. The breastfeeding, no? You know, during more than 50 years, we promote to the community the breastfeeding is very important to grow with the baby, very healthy, etc. Even in the past, some companies who produce artificial milk have a legal problem about this, why they promote this. And this is coming very important because the community knows how important it is to have the breastfeeding. And we know right now we appear with one neglected disease and say, you need to stop the breastfeeding. And that is not easy to say. We can conclude this is a more important topic from the next future to reduce the transmission, the vertical transmission. For that reason, we evaluate 43 women living with the infection, 40 were mothers. They have good knowledge about the transmission. They have positive attitude about the breastfeeding and recommended increased health provide knowledge about this. This is the summary from our study. The first topic is about the breastfeeding. You know, when in the summary, people say 27%, but we know in Peru, when you have more than 1 year, the rate is near to 40%. That the 40%, especially when you have 1 or 2 years, and that is very common in the community. In the mega cities, we have not that issue because the women start to provide breastfeeding, but they stop very early and try to have mixes. But in the community, this is very important. That is the reason why we use that information from the World Health Organization, but real, we have 40% when you have more than 12 months of the breastfeeding. The prevention is very clear. Appear different studies about this condition, and right now the prevention is feasible and is safe, etc. And right now, there are more and more ideas to try to reduce the breastfeeding to 3 to 6 months. In our study, when the woman give less than 6 months, the rate of the infection is near to 4%. And then when don't provide breastfeeding, it's almost near to 1%. That is what happened in our hands. And it's important to know what they're thinking about the option to stop the breastfeeding because they have HTLV1. This study was women who have between 18 to 60 years. This woman knew they have HTLV1 and it's coming from the consultation. Our student joined in the moment they are waiting from the visit, and they provide this survey, who was approved from the ethical committee board from our university. And we make 29 questions and 1 open-ended question from the woman. This is the project. What we have in this moment, we have this real was 44, but then 40, there are 1 who retired before we start. We have 43, and 40, they have babies, they have children. You see 72% have high school education or university. 77 is living in Lima. Lima is one city who have 11 million. Then almost 100% have electricity, almost 98% have sewage system, etc. And then at least 47% they have some related about the comorbidity, or they know some member of the family who have some comorbidity from HTLV1. That is the reason, in my opinion, why it's important, this group. Then when we check about these 43 women who have more than 1 child, is only 40, 3 have not babies, and these have diagnosis previous to the pregnancy, 31. They have only 9, they know the diagnosis before. And then these 9, they have a counsel, and 3, they accepted to have only a few months of mixes, etc. But they decide to use other system. And finally, 6 of these women have babies, and they have a formula from 5, and 1 have a breastfeeding from less than 6 months. That is a personal decision when they receive the advisor. It's very important when we asking each of these persons if they know how they can avoid the breastfeeding. And then they mention almost 80% they know, depending on the duration, the breastfeeding. Then when we're asking about some association disease, you see TSPs, HAM, or leukemia, lymphoma, or strongyloidiasis, they know this appear. And then when we're asking about how you can transmit it, they accepted to have sexual or breastfeeding or contaminated blood, or sometimes they say toilet seat, mosquito bite, or some hanging friends. There are some people feel that is how they acquire HTLV1. And finally, they propose some comment. That is the last question. 14, they say we need to improve the knowledge in population, prevent and stigma. there are too many people who don't know nothing about this disease. They also improve the health system regarding the HTLV1, and they mention about this, 12 mention about the very expensive, the treatment, etc. 6 opinion about the screening. They say all pregnant women need to be tested before they have a baby. And finally, they say we need to have decentralized specialists because they are not living in Lima, for instance. They are living in Cusco. And finally, the treatment. And she say, I would like to keep looking for a cure of my paraparesis. And again, this topic is important. And finally, about the, they are not a good information. I would like to know more about the parasitic and the association with the HTLV1. They recommended to training to health professionals. And finally, improving communication and diagnosis. We are using the HTLV channel in Spanish to try to promote this. Is important about the information from this. In conclusion, for us, this study highlights gaps in the Peruvian HTLV1 cascade. Still, we have not the national guidelines. Even we wrote between 80 persons 6 years ago. Then we like to see the screening as mandatory to have one opportunity, especially in endemic area from Peru. Again, there are limited access to health care because they are nervous. If they stop, they can have a stigma, they can have some problem in the family because they need to prove and have some virus who is transmitted by sex, etc. The stigma is very important. And they are requested to have improve the health care. And finally, they insist about the knowledge of the health people and the strong woman knowledge. For this, in conclusion, we recommend to make more studies, very similar, but you remember in our group are well educated, have electricity, water system, but that is not in the community. In the community, 50% or 40% are poor, they have no facilities, and they stop the breastfeeding, will be one economical impact, and we need to see what is the best solution. And one of the conclusions is we need to see the same study, but in endemic area, to try to see how is this conclusion. Change in the breastfeeding practice have a risk and have a benefit, and before we start to use in the countries, we need to put very clear the problem we can have to try to stop the breastfeeding. Finally, I need to say I thank you again to the Congress to give us the opportunity to present this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite the next speaker to come up, please. It's Luc Willems from the National Fund for Scientific Research in Belgium, and the title is Making the BLV Vaccine Available Worldwide.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, but I'm not going to talk about HTLV, but after the intervention of Damien at Workshop 1, I decided to completely change my presentation and to talk about the different hurdles that we had to manage with for the development of a vaccine. So it will be mostly a no science presentation. So this is my conflict of interest slide. So it's still academic research, development research, and we are still in contact with industries, but we want to do it as most possible ourselves. So what is BLV? So BLV is a retrovirus that infects bovine species, but it can also infect wildlife, and all a series of wildlife species can be infected and develop some signs of disease that is similar to what we see in the bovine species. So the main clinical manifestations of BLV infection is the development of leukemia and a lymphoma. How does the virus affect the bovine species? It's mostly by affecting immunity. And so that's why these animals develop clinical signs of opportunistic infections, like, for example, mastitis. But also, and this is the main problem of industry, is that the vaccines against other pathogens are not really effective. And that's why there would be an interest to vaccinate against BLV or to treat BLV, is because of the lack of good effectiveness of other vaccines. So in terms of economic loss, there is a reduction of milk production, but it's not very evident. It's a few percent. But the most important causes is the death of the animals. So the animals, they die frequently by spleen disruption. So you see an animal is very healthy and then it dies, and it's very extremely sudden. There are custom restrictions, so you cannot export, for example, to Europe because of BLV infection. And then a major cause is carcass contamination. So the animal is going to the slaughterhouse, and there what happens is, well, you have lymphoma, and so all the meat should be destroyed. And so this is a major problem for people. And then I put a question mark about human. I'll tell you a few words about that. So there are no vaccines and there are no treatment up to this one. So the principle, in fact, is that most of the trials to make a vaccines were not successful because it was difficult to have a permanent stimulation of the immune response. And so none of the vaccine that were based on subunits or RNA or DNA didn't work. And so we had to develop another strategy for BLV. So what we knew is that when you have an animal infected with a given strain, it's extremely difficult to inoculate another strain. And so this is also the strategy that we used. We had to develop a vaccine based on an infectious molecular clone with a series of deletions and mutations that would keep the immune response effective, but that would not be inducing any disease. And so, in fact, this kind of deletants, mutated viruses, you find them naturally in nature. So, in fact, this study was started in 1992 by doing reverse genetics and trying to find out what the different regions were doing. And so, this is the outcome of this kind of work, basic science work. So, basically, what we do is take a plasmid having an origin of replication and an antibiotic resistant gene. This was one of the problems. And what we do is mix that with liposomes, and we inject the animal, and so we have DNA that we can modify different ways. So to make a very, very long story very short, is that we ultimately find one mutant that has these kind of characteristics with the mutations in red. The pointer is not working. In the mutations and the deletions in red. And so this particular attenuated virus was tested in the bovine species in collaboration with Karina Trono from INTA in Buenos Aires. And what the data show is that in a herd, when this is the time frame with from the calves from birth up to 48 months, and you see that the prevalence is increasing. These are the red bars. And when you vaccinate the animals, all of them except one, the orange dot at 42 months, became infected so later on. So we have a very good effectiveness of vaccination in these animals in real conditions, in commercial conditions from a herd. So now we come to no science. What you have to do, and the university is asking you, well, make a patent because it can raise money. So, okay, we had to do a patent, it had to be accepted. And then a major hurdle is safety, particularly when you produce an attenuated vaccine. So we asked permission and the opinion of the CONABIA, the organism that is responsible for safety evaluation. And so I was a little bit surprised, and happily surprised, that they say that the provirus was even safer than the wild-type virus, because all what we do is taking things out of the virus, and it grows at very low, it replicates at very low level. So I said, well, it's safe, maybe you can try. No, they even say it's safer than the wild-type strain. It's better to have that mutant than having the wild-type strain. Then you don't do anything. You cannot do anything because you cannot commercialize. So you have to ask authorization to put that on the market. And this takes quite a while, and we recently, 2 years ago, at the approval to put that on the market. And we had to do that all ourselves because there was no real interest from the industry, because they said, well, it's maybe not an important disease and it's hidden, the farmers don't know that. And so we had to do that all ourselves. Okay, now a little bit science. There are technical constraints that we did not envision at the time. So for example, if you want to vaccinate in isolated areas, you cannot make a vaccine based on a lysate or protein or RNA. It doesn't work. You need something stable. And so we had to work with the plasmid, with the DNA, which is not that easy. The problem is that the plasmid is an antibiotic gene, so we replace the system by toxin, antitoxin system, so the CCDA, CTDB, so the bacteria is dying if it does not have the antitoxin system. And so this system is also used in human, so it has been approved for use in human also. So it's considered to be safe because these genes are present everywhere in the environment. So we get rid of the antibiotic genes. And then, I'm a researcher of doing basic science mostly. And so it was a very high challenge to produce a number of doses going up from 500 that we could produce in the lab up to possibly 1 billion cows in the world. So it's a real challenge. And so we are still working on that. And I must say we are not so good as the industry to do that. But okay, now delivery. How are you going to deliver this in as vaccine in large herds? And so the problem is if you use needles, is that you can transmit the disease while you're vaccinating. So, and veterinarians, they are lazy. They like to use a single needle and inject many animals. And in Europe, this has been the main cause of BLV transmission, the vets. So. Okay, so we were working on a system that is based on high pressure delivery. So basically, you have high pressure everywhere in all farms, and so you can deliver this very quickly when the animals are coming for example, for when you treat the animals, they just have to pass through, and you can inject them very easily. So we need a high throughput system to deliver the vaccination. Now, a major problem is cost and price. So we need to produce the vaccine very cheap, but it should not be too cheap for the price. For different reasons, is that in low-income countries it should be very low, below $1, but in the industry won't make it if they won't make profit. So you need to at least achieve $8 to $10. So now we are expanding this collaboration, and we are working not only in Argentina, but in the US, in Japan, in China. And the goal is, the restriction is that you have to prove that the vaccine is working in each country. So they don't believe what is being done in Argentina. You need to do all the work again. So that's what we start with, what we are doing now. Then we faced another problem, is the awareness of farmers. Because, as I said, it's not visible. You don't see when an animal has a disease, so there are no clinical symptoms. So they ignore it. Many farmers ignore it, they have it, until the animal dies or until there is a carcass condemnation. And so the clinical sites and the economic loss are occurring late. And finally, and this is really a major problem, is that the farmers, they don't believe you. They just say, well, prove that it works, and I don't want to be your experimental farmer, so do it somewhere else, and if it works, I'll do it. So you need to start proving that it works. And finally, is if the price is too low, then it is no value. So I won't use it because it's not expensive. That's the kind of thing we faced. Then the last point is customer. So the customers, they are aware about animal welfare, so more and more. And they're also aware about wildlife preservation. So it's difficult to manage that, particularly because there is very controversial literature about the correlation with BLV with other cancers, like occurrence of breast cancer. And so papers are going, suggesting that there is a link. I won't give my opinion on that, but the point is that there is literature on this point. So this leads maybe to consumers not to eat meat or consume milk, just to go to vegetarian food. So this is a major problem for the industry and for the farmers. Okay, so finally, and this is very recent, I've been told that it will not be possible to use a GMO, because it's a GMO, it's not a natural strain, to find a GMO that would be accepted in veterinary treatment in vaccines. And in fact, it has been discussed very actively during the last years. And in fact, now the FDA said, well, it's important to consider human health and animal health all together, and to see that you are able to treat both, that you consider both aspects. And in fact, genetically modified animals, they will be tolerated and even promoted, provided then they give an advantage to improve animal health or well-being, and in addition to that, if it's enhancing production. So this is a recent decision from the FDA, and this tells that, well, probably we won't face that particular order in the further development of the vaccine. Okay, I'm finished, and I would like to thank the people doing the work. What I'm doing here is just to try to explain what they're doing in the lab. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. And if we could ask the presenters to come and sit at the front, please, for the question session.
Dr. Ishii, thank you very much for your presentation. You discussed you had evidence of protection by neutralizing antibodies. Yes. Can you exclude a contribution to protection from binding antibodies that do not neutralize the virus in vitro?
Okay, so in this experiment, we roughly examine the binding antibody titer, but the all vaccinated animal induce the comparable level of binding antibody. So there is no correlation with the protection. And only the immunological the factor correlated with protection is the neutralizing antibody titer. So that we think the neutralizing antibody activity is most important for protection.
So, sorry, just have I understood correctly? Binding antibodies may also contribute to protection.
Of course, and for example, the effective function of antibody, like the ADCC or ADCP, and may contribute to the protection or eradication of infected cell or something. But in present, we have no the data about the ADCC activity or something. And now we are trying to evaluate the ADCC activity.
So I think you need to be careful about the concluding that it is neutralizing antibodies per se, themselves, that give the protection. It is very likely that there's contribution, as you say, from ADCC, from complement fixation, opsonization.
Yeah.
So I'd ask you if you consider not phrasing it as all neutralizing antibody.
Thank you for your kind comment.
Thanks. Yeah, this session was very maybe provocatively and ambitiously titled "How to Eliminate HTLV as a Public Health Problem," and I'm not sure if that's what we really focused on in this session. But that's actually anybody who works with WHO knows that's very specific WHO language. There's a number of diseases that WHO has made recommendations about and strategies for eliminating as a public health problem. For example, we have a number of neglected tropical diseases that are in that category. There's the mother-to-child transmission of syphilis, HIV, and hepatitis B. There's cervical cancer. So it's a very specific WHO thing. And I must say it's been excellent to have presence of Meg Doherty at the workshops and also Leandro presenting here. But I was wondering whether to actually understand what eliminate HTLV as a public health problem really means. And obviously we're not going to, it's not like smallpox, we're not going to get rid of this virus from the world like we did with smallpox, or at least maybe that's 100 years away. But it's really, I think it is really important that we do start thinking about what sort of targets we are going for in a public health sense. And I was wondering if Leandro or anybody else had started thinking about what it really means, and how we start thinking about this sort of strategy, as we've seen some fantastic examples already from Japan and from the Caribbean about progress, and let's do it.
Yes, thank you. That's a good question, and a question that I also want to know. But I think that's the next step that we need to define. And yesterday I mentioned in terms of the goals and targets. Now, out of this disease there are targets for elimination, that we have starters for elimination. They have goals defined both for the impact of these diseases and for programmatic, now in terms of the access to services. Some is to achieve zero transmission, some is elimination as a public health, so we can define some metrics for this, and for hepatitis, for example, is incidence and mortality. Other diseases, zero transmission, and sequela, like cervical cancer for the HPV. For HTLV, we don't have yet for the elimination of HTLV as a public health problem. Perhaps this may come from the HTLV Society, what you consider as a reduction of the burden of HTLV, how to define the elimination. But for the MTCT, we are making some progress because we have some information from the real world, like for example, Japan and other countries, and we are defining a reduction on the mother-to-child transmission rate, because it's a direct transmission, we can measure that. And we set this as an interim target for the region as 5% transmission, mother-to-child transmission rate. Maybe not the ideal number. We are not sure if that's what is defined. If we can define the elimination as this 5%, but it's a number that we know can be achievable based on the experience in Japan mostly. And also the programmatic. Now we need to define programmatic targets that we may how to achieve the 2%. We understand that achieving the coverage of the services, and that the screening, the intervention could be suspension of breastfeeding, short breastfeeding, also, and the linkage to care, for instance, for kids. For HTLV, we may not have the information to answer this now, and we may need models. Like for syphilis, we are pretty clear on syphilis. And also for HIV, all the targets were based on models. We have the burden of the disease. We know we have the interventions available, the impact of each intervention, and how, and depending on the coverage of these interventions, we know where we are going, how we can reduce the transmission, and in how long. So based on these models, a target of 50 cases per 1,000 live births was defined. But the programmatic targets also, if you don't have 95% of screening, 95% of treatment, 95% of antenatal care, you're never going to achieve the elimination target, the impact target. For HTLV, we don't have that information yet. We are working or maybe waiting for the evidence to be generated and some sort of model that could be developed. But, well, even with the 5%, I would say the countries, there are still a long way to go. And I think while we are already improving the response, we can work on the clear definition or precise definition of elimination. But yeah, it was a great question. Thank you.
Can I just put one question from the Slido, and then if we come to you after that, if that's okay. So it's for Damien, and it's if you've detected any viral mutations in the mice on PrEP, and did the mice that sustain infection have any resistance mutations?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we haven't looked at every mouse, but the ones we have looked at, we have not found mutations. Yeah, so the answer at this point is no, but I'm not going to say it's impossible.
Thank you. And so if we just have this as the last question, please, in the interest of...
It is a question for you too.
Sorry.
If I understand well in your model, you have two waves of the disease. The first one is the primo infections, and then you have clonal expansion when the virus gets integrated in the cells. So you said you can prevent the infection by antiviral therapy first, and then you can kill the clone by MCL1 inhibition. Did you try to use antiviral therapy at the end when you have a clonal expansion? Did you see a regression or no effect at all?
I just missed the last part of your question. So
the last part is when you treat your mice with MCL1 inhibitors, you see a decrease of the virus load. But if you treat these mice with antiviral therapy at the end of the proliferation, did you see an effect or no effect at all?
yeah, so it eliminates the proliferation of the cells, and I think it's removing, the blockade to apoptosis, so the cells are undergoing apoptosis and clearing is the mechanism.
But when you treat with antiviral therapy at this stage of the disease, do you see any effect or you have an effect?
So when we treat with the MCL1 inhibitor?
No. With antiviral therapy. You showed nicely when you use as a preemptive treatment antivirus therapy, you have no expansion of T cells, no inflammation. And then if at the end, when you have a clonal expansion, you said you treat with MCL1 inhibitor to decrease the proliferation of the cells. But at this stage, if you treat the mice with antiviral therapy, did you see an inhibition or not of the inflammation or the proliferation?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to talk to you about that later because...
So we discuss that.
Yeah. That's not entirely my specialty, to be honest. We need Marcel here for that.
Well, the last question, yes.
So, hi, Damien. I'm very interested in your mice model, and I'd like to know if you have more detailed information on the HTLV1 expression in infected mice.
So the question is the expression of HTLV1 in the mice? Yeah, so we can find, viral proteins, and we mostly measure by proviral load. Is that what you're asking about, or the RNA?
So most of the infected cells express. So how many percent or something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess we haven't actually followed exactly what is being expressed so much from the virus. We've looked more at the impact of the virus on cells. So when we look, there's a lot of virus there. It's every single cell. We think that there's productive expression of viral genes. We also see, and this was presented earlier, significant deletion of provirus occurs quickly in this system. There's no immunity. It's a really interesting phenomenon. So there is a loss of expression of most of the structural proteins of the virus pretty quickly. Retention, though, of the regulatory genes and, HBZ and TAX.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everyone.